We will now be looking at the Web Panel GeneXus object. It's a very flexible type of object with which we'll be able to implement different types of queries and display data in various ways. Right now, we're going to create a web panel that displays all of the cities we've entered in our application. We'll create a new web panel object. We can either hit Control-N, or we can just place our mouse pointer on the objects folder. And right-clicking, choose New Object. We'll name our web panel Cities. I click, and here we are looking at our web panel's web form. In order to display all of the cities, we'll have to insert a grid control onto this web form. How do we do this? Well, we can come over here to the Insert option on the menu bar and use the option Grid. Or we could select View, Other Tool Windows, and open the toolbox. This new tool panel will be displayed, and now we can drag the grid object onto the form. We drag it, and now it's asking us to insert the attributes we want to be displayed in this grid. We'll insert the attribute City Name, since it's the one we're interested in. And here we have our grid. Based on the attributes that show up here, GeneXus will infer which table it will have to navigate. The table that it will navigate is called the web panel's base table. The only attribute we have here is City Name, and City Name is a secondary attribute, a physical attribute of the Country City table. So the Country City table will be our web panel's base table. Let's run our application by pressing F5. We can see our web panel Cities in the Developer menu. We click on it, and it is displaying all the cities that have been entered into our database. This grid here is a standard grid which allows us to view the information in columns, one element per column. If we'd also like to see the city's information along with the city name, we could just click on this object and right-click, choosing columns, and then add. And here we select the other attributes we want to be displayed. So let's select city information. And now one more column gets added to our grid. Let's say we want the city information to be displayed after its name. To do this, we can just return to the columns option and select this attribute and move it down. Let's reflect on this situation right now. Say we wanted to display each country's information, not in rigid columns, but in a more flexible way. We'll create a new web panel, and this time we won't insert a standard grid, but a freestyle grid instead. So let's save our changes to this web panel and create a new one. I hit Control-N, and I create another web panel, which I'll name Cities per Country. Let's reopen our toolbox, and this time we'll add a freestyle grid control. We'll expand this grid a bit, and first we'll insert the country flag. Below the flag, we want to display the country name, and below the country name, we'll want to display the cities that correspond to that country. So we'll place our pointer within the grid, and we'll insert the country flag attribute. We choose the option Insert Attribute and select our attribute. I do the same thing and choose the country name. And below it, we want to display a column containing the cities, so we'll insert a standard grid into our freestyle grid. We reopen our toolbox and now we'll drag a standard grid over here. We'll insert the attribute we want to display, which is city name. And we have the flag, the country name, and the list of cities for that country. So let's delete some of this extra space and save our changes. Before we run our application, let's note that we can insert any control inside a freestyle grid. In our example, besides the country flag and country name attributes, we also inserted a standard grid. When we insert this grid, GeneXus finds the relationships that exist between the tables, and that's why it will be listing the cities for each country. So now let's run our application once again by hitting F5. We click on our Cities per Country web panel and see the information, the flag, the country's name, and the cities that correspond to each country. And it's all being displayed in a single column. Let's return to GeneXus to modify and improve the appearance of this web panel. We don't want all this information to be displayed in a single column. So we'll edit the properties of our freestyle grid. We select it, hit F4, and look for the columns property, which by default has the value 1. That's why everything was being displayed in a single column. Let's just insert another value, 3. I save the changes, and now to improve the appearance of the flag, we'll reduce the size of it. And I save the changes, and we're going to run the application. We click on our web panel, and we can see our information. The columns, we can see the columns, but we'll expand the space between them a little bit. We return to GeneXus, and we'll modify some other properties of our freestyle grid. Once again, we'll edit the properties and look at the properties called cell spacing and cell padding. So we'll enter the value 10 over here, and now this has a spread over here. And we'll enter the value 5 here, and again we'll save our changes and run our application. I'll click on our web panel, and we can see now that our information is spaced out a little bit more. Now, as an example, we'll modify our Work with Countries pattern so that we'll be able to access our new web panel from the pattern. We open our country transaction and look for the Work with pattern, and we'll add an action to our pattern instance. We'll associate a button to this action, which we'll place inside the grid that displays the country information, and as a result of this action, we'll tell it to call our Cities per Country web panel. So we place our mouse pointer on top of this node selection. I right-click, choose Add Actions, and now we'll add a new action. And we'll edit its properties hitting F4. We'll name it View Cities per Country. The same thing for the caption. And here we'll indicate which GeneXus object we want to call. We browse and select our object. We'll search for the objects of web panel type. And we look for our Cities per Country object. We save our changes, and we'll run our application once again. We select our Work With country, and here we can see our button, our View Cities per Country button. We click this button, and our Cities per Country web panel opens. We've seen how to implement web panels using different types of grids, and also how to associate an action to our pattern instance.